Well, it happened. Donald Trump's town hall on CNN took place, and it was just about as disastrous as I think we all expected. There's so much from this that I want to take a look at, so I'll actually break this up into multiple segments. If you're a YouTube segment viewer, find those other clips on the channel for the complete review of the event. If the segment just came out, give it a second, and then the other two will as well. Before we dive into what we'll look at in this segment, let me just say CNN should not have done this town hall. That I think is one of the biggest takeaways from the night, even though Caitlin Collins did try to fact check Trump a lot in real time. She's obviously super sharp and knew what she was talking about. Treating someone as dangerous as Trump as sort of a normal candidate with this type of event is such an irresponsible decision by a network like CNN. But with that being said, let's jump into some of what went on. You guys can let me know based on what we review if you agree with my judgment on that. Starting with what happened at the very beginning on the subject, you'll never guess, of the 2020 election. Right out of the gate, Trump lied, shockingly, about the 2020 results, with Caitlin Collins fact-checking him repeatedly. Here's the first moment we'll look at.
President Trump, thank you for your time here tonight. We got a great crowd here in New Hampshire, a lot of voters with a lot of questions about what your 2024 term would look like, what another Trump term would look like. We'll get to the voters shortly, but your polls show that you are dominating the Republican race right now, but you are also under active federal investigation for trying to overturn the 2020 election results. Your first term ended with a deadly riot at the Capitol, and you still have not publicly acknowledged the 2020 election results. Why should Americans put you back in the White House?
Because we did fantastically. We got 12 million more votes than we had in, as you know, in 2016. I actually say we did far better in that election. Got the most that anybody's ever gotten as a sitting president of the United States. I think that when you look at that result and when you look at what happened during that election, unless you're a very stupid person, you see what happens. A lot of the people in this audience, and maybe a couple that don't, but most people understand what happened. That was a rigged election, and it's a shame that we had to go through it. It's very bad for our country. All over the world, they looked at it, and they saw exactly what everyone else saw. You look, even if you just look recently with the 51 intelligence agents, that made a 16-point difference. If you look at the FBI, and Twitter, they call it Twitter files, made a big difference. If you look at
Mr. President, back to what you just said there, though, it was not a rigged election. It was not a stolen election. You and your supporters lost more than 60 court cases on the election. It's been nearly 2.5 years. Can you publicly acknowledge that you did lose the 2020 election?
Let me just go on. If you look at True the Vote, they found millions of votes on camera, on government cameras, where they were stuffing ballot boxes. So with all of that, I think it's a shame that what happened. I think it's a very sad thing for our country.
As we've gone through a gazillion times now on this show, everything Trump is saying there is nonsense. As Caitlin Collins noted, he lost more than 60 court cases on the matter. Every investigation that's been done confirmed the election was secure. Every recount, every audit. And as is so important to emphasize, Trump's team paid researchers to look into the states that Trump was making fraud claims about. The researchers came back and said they couldn't find proof, and yet still Trump insists the election was stolen. Here's more.
A lot of questions about the economy and foreign policy tonight, but what you just said there, Republican officials debunked those claims about fraudulent ballots. We want to give you a chance tonight.
Who?
Republican officials in Georgia and every single state. There is no your own election officials, Mr. President. So we wanted to give you a chance.
People were afraid to take on the issue. But we have a big problem in this country. We
wanted to give you a chance to acknowledge
we have
the
elections
results
that were horrible. If you look at what happened in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, if you look at what happened in Detroit, Michigan, if you look at what happened in Atlanta, millions of votes, and all you have to do is take a look at government cameras. You'll see them, people going to 28 different voting booths to vote, to put in 7 ballots apiece.
But Mr. President,
and they're all
I
on
have
camera.
to stop you there because there is no evidence of that. Your own election officials testified to that and have said that Republicans in these states did this. In Georgia, there were multiple recounts, including a hand recount.
If there is one positive thing that came out of the night, it's that Trump came off like a raving lunatic during these moments. They're just rambling about voter fraud claims that are completely made up, just myths. I didn't completely understand, though, why Caitlin Collins kept asking Trump if he wanted to acknowledge the results of the election, I guess to show the audience that he won it. But it's a strange question to ask when obviously he's not going to do it. His entire identity now has become denying the results of the 2020 election. As I've said before, a lot of his 2024 campaign is just, hey, I like really wish I didn't lose in 2020. But this is the type of situation you're going to get whenever you interact with someone as delusional as Trump. Then we get to the subject of January 6th, and Trump gets asked about Mike Pence. Take a look.
To brag about the fact that he killed her.
The officer was not bragging about the fact that he killed
he
her,
was
but
bragging.
one person who was at the Capitol that day, as you know, was your vice president, Mike Pence, who says that you endangered his life on that day.
I don't think he was in any danger.
Mr. President, do you feel that you owe him an apology?
No, because he did something wrong. He should have put the votes back to the state legislatures, and I think we would have had a different outcome. I really do.
But he doesn't have the authority to do that, as you know.
What?
The vice president does not have the authority to reject those election results.
Are you ready? Let's have this one out just now, because it's interesting. Let's keep it interesting, right? I like Mike Pence very much. He's a very fine man. He's a very nice man. He made a mistake. His lawyer said, you cannot move. I called him the human conveyor belt. I said, even if the votes, I talked to his lawyer, even if the votes are absolutely fraudulent, he can't say, yes, sir, he can't send back. And the Democrats played it, and the rhinos played it. And then the election was over. They told him he couldn't do it. And Mike said to me, I can't do it. The lawyers told me I can't do it. They can't do it. But the lawyers were wrong, because right after the election, they all met, the rhinos and the Democrats, and they worked out a plan to make sure that future vice presidents don't do what I said you could do.
That's not what happened. You're referring to the Electoral Count Act. I've read that. There is no authority.
No,
legal experts, including Republican legal experts, say that he does not have that authority, Mr. President.
One of the most disturbing aspects of this event was all the clapping from the crowd. Obviously, that's at the core of the problem, right? Trump would just be a ranting lunatic that didn't cause any damage if he didn't have the support of millions of people. And there, the crowd is clapping for Trump responding to a question about Mike Pence's life being threatened by essentially saying, yeah, he deserved it. He didn't do what I wanted him to. And of course, no, the vice president doesn't have the authority to single-handedly deny election results. What would be the purpose of elections if one person could decide whether or not they were valid? The people decide, not the vice president. And Trump, the people decided to kick you out of office no matter how many times you tell yourself otherwise. Then Trump said this about the January 6th rioters.
My question to you is, will you pardon the January 6th rioters who were convicted of federal offenses?
I am inclined to pardon many of them. I can't say for every single one, because a couple of them probably they got out of control. But you know, when you look at Antifa, what they've done to Portland, and if you look at Antifa, look at what they've done to Minneapolis and so many other places. Look at what they did to Seattle and BLM. Many people were killed.
Trump says he's interested in pardoning many of the January 6th rioters, which is not a surprising answer, but it should still shock us. One of the things I want to make sure I do on this show constantly is remind you as well as myself that none of this is normal. The craziness, it's becoming common, but it shouldn't be normal to us. Trump recently did a song with the January 6th rioters, and now he's saying he'll probably pardon many of them. That is a former president celebrating the people who attempted to prevent the peaceful transition of power. But of course, that is what he would be doing because he was the one who told them to do it in the first place. And I want to once again remind you of something else as well, because I still get the question in my personal life of, hey, I get the January 6th was bad and all of that, but why is it something that's a big deal to you years later? And as I've said, the reason is because of what it was and what it represented. The damage on that day matters, absolutely. The lives impacted, the pain caused, the threats, all of it. But often people will respond to that and say, yeah, but this riot over here was more deadly, or this riot over there did more property damage. And that's why the conversation about what it represented is so important. January 6th, as we've talked about, represented an assault on our democracy by a political movement that today holds the very same views that caused January 6th. That day and the actions of the rioters were motivated by the very same lies Trump was using to justify attempting to install himself president, despite the fact that he lost. Trump and his allies created a scheme to halt the democratic process, as we've gone over in more detail in the past, and keep Trump in the White House illegally. And just like how through that scheme, Trump was trying to overthrow our democracy, the January 6th rioters running parallel to that were trying to overthrow our democracy based on the lies that Trump was telling. And okay, that happens and then everyone disavows those claims. Maybe we can move on. But Trump is telling the very same lies to this day during this town hall. So the damage he would be willing to do to our democracy if he became president again with the support of his cult followers would be irreparable and disastrous. And that is why calling out Trump and his movement daily is crucial if we want to protect our democracy. We have much more to look at from this town hall. We will do that in the next segment.